When you look at a piece of technology, um, it is incredibly easy to just see the literal mechanism.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
a forklift takes the place of human lifting.
Right.
A calculator takes the place of, mental arithmetic. We kind of view these things as these simple one-to-one swaps. Muscle for hydraulics, brain power for silicon.
Yeah, totally. It's the most common way to view progress, right? We see a new tool and we evaluate it entirely on its localized utility. Like, does this make the task faster? Does it make it cheaper?
Exactly.
Oh.
But if you pull back, like if you look at the broad, staggering sweep of human society, you realize these tools don't just replace our hands or our math. They completely fundamentally rewrite the social script.
They really do.
The tools we invent to make our lives easier, they end up inventing entirely new anxieties, forging new social classes, and just completely dictating who holds power and who gets left behind.
It's so true. A single piece of technology, whether it's, forged from iron in an 18th century blast furnace or coded into a neural network today, it brings a completely new reality along with it. It just unspools the fabric of how we interact with each other.
And that profound unspooling effect is the entire focus of our deep dive today. We are acting as your expert sociology guides for this really fascinating installment of a special series called The Social Fabric Unraveled, which is created and produced by Adam.
It's a great series.
It is. And the mission today is massive. For you listening, we are going to trace the sociological evolution of human labor. We're going to unpack how the social organization of work has fundamentally shifted over the last 3,000 years.
Yeah, because it's really the only way to truly understand the water we're swimming in right now. I mean, we have to look at these massive macro-level historical transitions to make any sense of the micro-level realities of our modern Monday mornings.
Right.
Human labor is never static. It's this constant, exhausting negotiation between the tools we build and the unexpected social hierarchies those tools inevitably create.
And we have a really brilliant stack of research driving this deep dive. We're pulling from a historical overview provided by MITx on the evolution of work, a deeply comprehensive lecture breakdown by Jason Crawford on the mechanics of historical labor.
That one is amazing. Yeah.
It's so dense, but so good. We've also got Nelson Lichtenstein's landmark book, State of the Union, detailing the U.S. labor movement, and some foundational sociology notes tracing societal transformation.
And to bring us right to the bleeding edge, we're also unpacking a brand new 2026 sociological study by Warakovich, Noonan, and Skaggs.
Yes.
It's all about how generative AI is reorganizing creative labor right at this very moment. And the stakes across all these eras, they're remarkably consistent.
Yeah, it's always about who controls the work, who reaps the surplus, and, what does it actually mean for human autonomy? So, to understand where work is going in this age of artificial intelligence, we have to figure out why we started, quote-unquote, working in the first place.
Right. We have to establish the original baseline of human existence.
Which means looking at the hunter-gatherer bands.
Yeah. The sociology notes point to groups like the Yanomamo in the Brazilian rainforest or the Kung San in Southwest Africa. This was the default mode of human existence for the vast, vast majority of our history.
Right.
And the defining sociological characteristic of these societies was a profound structural egalitarianism.
Which makes a lot of sense. I mean, when your only daily business is just basic caloric survival, there really isn't a corporate ladder to climb.
No, not at all. The division of labor was incredibly simple. It was based almost entirely on age and sex. Everyone contributed. And crucially, there were no distinct social classes.
Because you couldn't really have them.
Right. There was no accumulation of massive personal wealth, because wealth in a nomadic society is, well, it's a physical liability.
Yeah, you cannot hoard what you cannot carry.
Exactly. And you cannot carry much when you're constantly migrating to follow the herds or the seasonal harvests.
I always think of it essentially as a communal camping trip. Like, if you go out into the deep woods with 20 people, everyone has to pitch in just to keep the fire going, right? To secure the tents, to find water.
Yeah, if someone decides they want to be the CEO of the campsite
and just sit on a log demanding a cut of the berries,
the whole group's survival is threatened.
Exactly. That person is going to get kicked out of the tent. There is simply no margin for a ruling class when survival is that thin.
Right. So the labor is entirely tied to immediate communal need. You work to eat today, period.
But then something shifts.
Yeah. We experience what sociologists call the first social revolution, the domestication of plants and animals.
Okay.
We shift into horticulture and pastoralism. Humans stop following the food and start growing it in one place. They build permanent settlements.
And the second you stop moving, the camping trip dynamics shatter.
They do. Because stationary life allows for accumulation.
Mhm.
You can build a heavy clay pot. You can store extra grain. The sources note that this is when increased trade and interaction between different groups really developed.
Because you have stuff to trade.
Right. People began to acquire objects they considered valuable beyond just immediate survival. And as some families or clans acquired more of these goods than others, that simple baseline equality began to give way to conflict, to the concept of property, and eventually to warfare.
Wow. But the real tipping point, like the moment where the social fabric fundamentally changes its weave forever, that hinges on one specific piece of technology, right?
Oh, absolutely. The plow.
The plow.
The agrarian era, which is often called the second social revolution, is driven entirely by the plow. It is arguably one of the most disruptive technologies ever invented.
Which sounds so simple to us now.
I know, but think about it. Before it, human beings were just scratching the earth with sticks or hand tools. It was incredibly labor-intensive, and the yield was terrible.
Yeah.
The plow, especially once humanity figured out how to harness it to animal power, allowed us to churn up massive amounts of nutrient-rich soil deep below the surface.
Right.
And the result of that mechanical efficiency is probably the most important word in the entire history of economics.
Surplus.
Surplus, yes. You could finally grow more food than you needed to eat that day. You had a buffer against the winter. You actually had extra.
And surplus is essentially the engine of diversification.
Exactly. If one farmer with a plow can suddenly grow enough food to feed 10 people, those other 9 people are suddenly unchained from the dirt.
They no longer have to spend every waking hour foraging or farming. They get to specialize.
This ushers in the craft stage of human labor. You get artisans, shoemakers, blacksmiths, carpenters.
Right.
You also get people who have the time to sit and simply think. And that cognitive freedom leads to the invention of the spinning wheel, the development of numerology, observing the stars for calendar making, the birth of writing.
So the entire dawn of what we call civilization is literally funded by the caloric surplus generated by the plow.
It is.
It sounds like a miracle. I mean, the plow gives us art, mathematics, complex architecture, but the sociology notes highlight a massive dark consequence to this. The moment you create a surplus, you create something that can be hoarded.
Yeah, that's the catch.
And hoarding inevitably leads to intense, formalized social stratification.
Right, because the surplus has to be stored somewhere. Usually this meant a centralized granary. And whoever controls the doors to the granary controls the entire society.
Right.
So an elite group emerged to take control of these surplus resources. This is the birth of a ruling class. They didn't just sit on the food. They began to levy taxes on the very people who were out in the fields growing it.
Wow.
This concentration of resources and power and the resulting subjugation of the powerless actually preceded the emergence of the formal state.
So, wait. Are we really saying that the moment human beings solve the baseline problem of starvation, we immediately utilize that success to invent the class system and oppress each other?
Sociologically speaking, yeah, pretty much.
That is, wow.
Because surplus creates a zero-sum game of wealth accumulation that was physically impossible in the hunter-gatherer bands.
Right, you couldn't do it before.
Exactly. And it also fundamentally rewrote the ideology of work. The MITx source breaks this down in a really fascinating way. In many of these new agricultural civilizations, hard physical work, the very plowing and harvesting that was keeping the civilization alive, became viewed as deeply undignified.
Oh, because if you're doing it, you're not the elite.
Exactly. It was seen as something beneath the dignity of the ruling class.
Right, because if you have true power, your power is demonstrated by the fact that your hands are clean.
Yes. So the hard labor was outsourced. It was pushed onto slaves, servants, and serfs. The luxurious lifestyles of the elite were entirely subsidized by the backbreaking labor of a massive underclass.
Unbelievable.
Interestingly, gender inequality also became deeply formalized here, as men began to monopolize the newly created wealth, the land ownership, and the resources. They pushed women increasingly into marginalized or strictly domestic roles.
Though it's fascinating that this ideological split, like how work was viewed, wasn't uniform across the globe.
No, not at all.
Okay.
In other cultures, hard work was framed in the exact opposite way. It wasn't a punishment, it was a profound religious or communal virtue.
Right.
It was a way to signify your contribution to the social harmony, or to please the gods.
It's just wild to think for you listening that the exact same physical action, right, like plowing a wheat field, it can be viewed as degrading servitude in one culture and a divine duty in another, entirely dependent on who is holding the surplus and telling the story.
It's all about the social context, and this agrarian system, with its deep inequalities, its total reliance on human and animal muscle, and its rigid system of tying people to specific plots of land or, highly specialized lifelong crafts, it remained the dominant mode of human existence for thousands of years.
Yeah, for millennia, work was highly physical, it was incredibly low paying, and your destiny was pretty much set the moment you were born. You were a farmer, or you were a blacksmith, or you were a lord.
Right.
But then, late in the 18th century, a new tool arrived. And this one completely shattered the agrarian ceiling.
We are talking about the third social revolution, the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
And the defining technology introduced around 1765 by James Watt is the steam engine.
So we moved from human and animal muscle to mechanized combustible energy. And to really grasp what a seismic shock this was to the social fabric, we have to look at the numbers Jason Crawford provides in his historical lecture.
They're mind-blowing.
Before the Industrial Revolution, labor productivity was astonishingly low. Like half of the entire workforce had to be farmers just to keep the world from starving to death. One farm family could produce enough food to feed themselves and roughly one other family.
The margins were razor thin. And if you weren't farming, you were engaged in making basic necessities by hand. Spinning cloth, weaving, making tools. When productivity is that low, poverty is an absolute mathematical inevitability. A society simply cannot consume more than it produces.
Right.
In Great Britain, in the mid-1700s, the average wage was the equivalent of less than $10 a day in modern currency. And that was considered high for the global standard at the time.
The steam engine and the rapid mechanization that followed it blows the roof off that mathematical limit. Look at how the actual physical nature of work changed. Crawford uses the example of spinning cloth. Before mechanization, a person would use a drop spindle or a spinning wheel. They're spinning exactly one thread at a time. It is painstakingly slow.
Then the water frame is invented in the late 1700s. Suddenly, a single machine can spin 8 threads at once.
Wow.
And very quickly, they build models with over 100 spindles. So 1 or 2 workers tending this machine are suddenly producing the output of 100 skilled hand spinners.
That's just, the leap in labor productivity is almost incomprehensible to the people living through it.
It really is. And it wasn't just textiles. Agriculture was transformed again.
Right.
For centuries, a farmer harvested wheat by walking through a field, swinging a heavy scythe, cutting down the stalks maybe 1 foot at a time.
It sounds exhausting.
In the 1800s, Cyrus McCormick invents the mechanical reaper pulled by horses. Crawford notes this early reaper did the work of about 10 men swinging scythes.
And if you fast forward to the modern combine harvester, you have this massive machine with a 30-foot wide swath rolling at 10 miles an hour, doing the work of 100 men.
Exactly. This scale of mechanization changes everything. But the real sociological shock isn't just the machines themselves, it's how the machines forced us to reorganize the human beings operating them.
The birth of the factory system.
Yeah, exactly.
Because before the factory, if you were a master craftsman, say like a clockmaker or a gunsmith, you made the entire product yourself. You learned every single step, from forging the raw metal to assembling the delicate gears.
Right.
You controlled your own shop, you set your own hours, you owned your own tools.
But the factory system, which was championed later by figures like Henry Ford, it annihilated that model. It instituted a finely tuned division of labor.
Yeah.
The process of making a clock or a gun was broken down into dozens of tiny, discrete, localized steps. Instead of one master craftsman doing all of them, you had dozens of unskilled workers doing exactly one step over and over and over again for 12 hours a day.
And they were utilizing interchangeable parts made with such precision by machine tools that they didn't need a craftsman to painstakingly file them down to fit. Any gear could swap with any other gear. It sped up the assembly process massively.
It did, and the output generated vast new wealth. As Crawford points out, the GDP per capita, which had essentially flatlined for centuries, suddenly went vertical.
Just a straight line up.
Over the course of the industrial era, it grew 20 to 30 times over pre-industrial levels.
But let's look at this from the perspective of the human soul on the assembly line, right? Go from being an independent craftsman who directs his own work, takes a break when he needs to, feels a sense of completion when the clock is finished, to being a human cog in a deafening, windowless room, performing one repetitive motion under the strict punitive discipline of a factory overseer.
It's a huge psychological shift.
Karl Marx is quoted in our sources looking at this exact phenomenon and warning, the worker becomes an ever cheaper commodity the more commodities he creates.
Yeah.
It sounds absolutely dystopian. Why would anyone willingly leave the farm or the village shop to go work in these factories?
It is the central paradox of the industrial age.
Right.
The counter-narrative to the undeniable misery of the factory floor is the wage premium.
Okay.
The brutal, unsentimental truth is that despite the terrible conditions, the factories paid significantly better than the alternatives.
How much better, though?
Well, Crawford cites economic historians looking at Britain in the 1830s. Unskilled laborers who moved from the countryside to the city to work in the building trades earned about 50% more than they did as agricultural workers.
A whole 50%.
Yeah. And simply submitting to the strict discipline of a factory, agreeing to those brutal, unbroken, regimented hours, commanded a wage premium of around 66% compared to working from home or in an undisciplined independent shop.
So people were literally selling their daily autonomy for a massive pay bump.
Yes. And it wasn't just about the raw currency. It was about what that currency bought in terms of social freedom and mobility.
Right.
Crawford brings up a truly fascinating case study here. The Lowell Mill Girls in Massachusetts.
This was one of the most revealing parts of the historical data, I thought.
It really is. These were young, unmarried women who flocked to work in the textile mills in the 1800s. To modernize, working 12 to 14 hours a day in a loud, incredibly dangerous, lint-filled mill sounds like a nightmare of exploitation.
Oh, entirely.
But for these women, it was a vital, unprecedented escape. We actually have their own words on this. A periodical put out by the girls themselves, called the Lowell Offering, listed the reasons why they came to the mills.
And their reasons are just so intensely human. Some of them sound like they could be written today.
Yeah.
Like one girl wrote, she came because her lover has gone on a whaling voyage, and she wishes to be married when he returns, and she would like more money than her father will give her.
I love that one.
Another said, her parents are wicked infidels.
That's pretty strong.
And one simply stated she came because she hates her mother-in-law.
It's amazing, but it reveals a profound structural shift in society. Before the factory system, an unmarried woman in an agrarian society was largely viewed as a burden on her male relatives.
Yeah, she was trapped in domestic servitude, completely dependent on her father or brothers for survival.
Exactly. The factory, for all its horrors and exploitation, offered her a direct cash wage. As one memoirist of the time wrote, from a condition approaching pauperism, they were at once placed above want.
Wow.
They could earn their own money, hold it in their own hands, and spend it as they pleased. It was the birth of female financial independence in the industrial world.
So they basically traded the micro-control of their fathers and husbands for the macro-control of the factory boss.
That's a great way to put it.
It is a severe trade-off, a massive loss of daily physical autonomy. But the gain was a structural, life-altering independence that the farm never allowed.
And that tension between the undeniable generation of vast new wealth and opportunity and the severe degradation of the daily human experience is really the defining conflict of the industrial age.
Right.
The wealth was exploding, but it was being built in environments that were incredibly dark, deafeningly loud, and profoundly, violently dangerous.
Which brings us to a crucial pivot in the sociological timeline. How did society patch up the bleeding wounds of industrialization? How did we forge a social contract that allowed us to survive our own incredibly dangerous machines?
Because the early factories were, quite literally, slaughterhouses.
Yeah.
The sources detail the specific risks workers faced daily. Unguarded leather belts moving at terrifying speeds, massive iron flywheels, exposed drill bits and cutting blades, wooden walkways high up near the ceilings without any railings.
Unbelievable.
And steam boilers that routinely reached critical pressures and exploded, leveling entire buildings. Workers were routinely losing fingers, eyes, arms, and their lives.
What is truly baffling to me when you read Crawford's lecture is that initially, nobody seemed to care. Neither the management nor the workers themselves prioritized safety.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
If you were working next to a spinning blade that just took your friend's hand off yesterday, how do you not demand a guard on it today?
Well, It comes down to the deep psychological mindset they carried over from the pre-industrial world.
Okay.
Before the factory, life was just inherently, unavoidably risky. People died constantly of disease, animal attacks, weather exposure, or simple infections. Risk was viewed as an inherent fact of nature.
You couldn't control it, you just survived it.
Right. Furthermore, within the independent craft tradition, safety was the individual's sole responsibility. If a blacksmith burned himself on his own forge, it was his own clumsy fault.
So when they moved into the centralized factories, the workers retained that hyper-individualistic mindset regarding their own bodily safety.
They did. Crawford notes that male workers in particular viewed danger as a test of manliness.
Wow.
Caring about safety equipment, like wearing a hard hat or goggles, was often seen as being weak or a sissy. Workers would actively remove safety guards from machines if they felt the guards slowed down their production rate or was mildly inconvenient.
That is wild.
And management, naturally, shared and weaponized this view. They blamed accidents entirely on the carelessness of the individual worker.
And the legal system of the 19th century backed management up entirely, didn't it?
Oh, completely. If a worker sued an employer because they got mangled in a machine, the employer could easily dodge liability under existing tort law. If the company's lawyers could prove the worker was even slightly negligent, or if they could prove a different worker's negligence caused the accident, they called that the fellow servant rule, or even if they just argued that danger was an inherent, assumed part of taking the job, the employer paid absolutely nothing.
The system was completely rigged to view safety as a personal moral failure, not a structural engineering problem.
Exactly.
So what actually forced the factories to become safe? It clearly wasn't a sudden spontaneous awakening of corporate benevolence.
No, it was liability law.
Ah.
The shift in legal liability fundamentally changed the physical landscape of work. Around the turn of the 20th century, starting in Germany, then spreading to Britain, and finally sweeping across the United States, governments instituted a no-fault workers' compensation system.
No fault meaning the court stops caring whose fault the accident was.
Right. The new system simply stated, if a worker is injured on the job, the employer is liable to pay for it. Period. There is no long, drawn-out lawsuit about negligence or who removed what safety guard. There's simply a schedule of fixed payments. You lose a finger, the company pays X amount. You lose an eye, the company pays Y amount.
And suddenly, injuries transition from being a sad moral failing to being a fixed, predictable, and very large line item on the company's ledger.
You hit the nail on the head. It made financial sense to invest heavily in safety because injuries were now incredibly expensive.
Right.
This triggered a massive mentality shift. The goal changed from avoiding legal liability in court to preventing the accident on the factory floor in the first place. Large corporations like U.S. Steel and DuPont began forming dedicated safety boards.
Okay.
But crucially, these boards were not led by lawyers, they were led by engineers.
So they started treating human injury as a mechanical failure of the factory system.
Exactly. They applied professional engineering intelligence to the problem of human frailty. They put physical metal guards over the belts and blades so a worker couldn't touch them even if they tried. They installed automatic shutoff mechanisms. They built sturdy railings. They mandated safety goggles and steel-toed boots, and they enforced wearing them even when the workers themselves resisted.
And the results were?
Staggering. In the early decades of the 20th century, injury rates at companies that implemented these engineering controls dropped by 90 to 95%.
It is a perfect example of how a legal mechanism, changing the rules of financial liability, forced a technological and sociological change that saved millions of lives.
Absolutely.
But physical safety wasn't the only battleground. As the wealth grew, there was also the massive fight for time and for basic human dignity.
Yeah, as the Industrial Revolution progressed, we saw unprecedented urbanization. Millions of people packed into dirty, crowded, disease-ridden cities to work in these centralized factories.
Right.
Eventually, the workers realized that while they were making more cash than they did on the farm, they were being treated as entirely disposable commodities. This collective realization is the engine of the modern labor movement.
Workers began to band together, demanding what the MITx video calls humane work conditions. They realized a profound truth about industrial capitalism. An individual worker has zero leverage against a massive factory owner, but 1,000 workers striking together can stop the machines and the profits entirely.
Exactly. The labor movement fought for incredible fundamental shifts in how human beings are allowed to live. They fought to eradicate child labor, which was rampant. They fought for the 10-hour workday and then eventually the 8-hour workday.
They literally invented the weekend.
They did. If you have Saturday and Sunday off to spend with your family, you have the historical labor movement to thank for that.
Now, the macro politics of this struggle in the United States are incredibly complex. We have a great source for this, Nelson Lichtenstein's book, State of the Union. And just to be clear, for you listening, we are looking at this impartially.
Right, absolutely.
We're not taking a stance on unions or legislation. We are tracing how the legal architecture of the modern workplace was built, because understanding the push and pull of this history is vital to seeing how your own workplace operates today.
Well said. So Lichtenstein traces how the U.S. labor movement truly exploded during the Great Depression of the 1930s. The defining piece of legislation in this era was the 1935 Wagner Act.
Okay.
This law facilitated massive industrial unionism. It legally forced companies to recognize and collectively bargain with unions, creating what Lichtenstein calls industrial democracy.
Right.
It was a structural attempt to balance the immense concentrated power of corporate management with the collective organized power of the workers.
But Lichtenstein's book makes it clear that the Wagner Act didn't just solve the problem forever. The corporate forces pushed back hard. How did they close that loophole and contain the movement?
Well, the pendulum always swings back. Lichtenstein argues that the labor movement was subsequently contained and heavily narrowed by antagonistic political and corporate forces. A major turning point was the 1947 Taft-Hartley Act.
How did Taft-Hartley restrict the unions?
It significantly restricted their power and growth potential. It allowed individual states to pass right-to-work laws, which severely hindered union growth outside of the traditional industrial Rust Belt. But crucially, it specifically excluded supervisors from the right to collectively bargain.
Just that one word, supervisors.
Yeah. Yes. This seemingly small legal distinction stifled unionization in the rapidly growing white-collar service sector. Lichtenstein points out that this act redefined labor's sociological frontier, effectively trapping the union movement within traditional blue-collar manufacturing while the rest of the economy evolved.
And as we moved into the 1960s and 70s, the societal focus shifted entirely. We moved away from the idea of collective class-based bargaining and toward the concept of individual rights.
Right.
The source mentions Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. This was a monumental, necessary victory for human equality, prohibiting employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. But Lichtenstein notes a subtle sociological side effect. It shifted the solution to workplace problems from a collective, union-led approach to an individualistic, legal rights approach.
Yeah, the old labor question, the broad societal debate about the fundamental power dynamics between the working class and the owners of capital, it practically vanished from popular political discourse. It was replaced by a focus on individual rights litigation and, eventually, the rise of corporate-led human relations management.
Despite the containment of the labor movement, these historical battles, combined with liability laws and the sheer overwhelming wealth generated by industrial machinery, they improved our lives dramatically.
Oh, unquestionably.
Crawford points out a staggering statistic. A 20-year-old man in 1881 could expect to spend half his entire waking hours working for money.
Half.
Today, because of longer lifespans, the eradication of child labor, shorter work weeks, and the invention of retirement, we only spend about 20% of our lifetime hours working for money. 80% of our time is our own.
The machines, as Crawford provocatively puts it, did exactly what we asked them to do. They took our jobs. They took the incredibly dangerous, dirty, manual jobs. They took the jobs from children. They took our nights and weekends. And that was a tremendous historical victory for human progress.
But just as physical, back-breaking labor began to wane as the primary human experience, a new type of machine emerged. One that wasn't aimed at replacing our muscles, but amplifying our minds.
We enter the fourth social revolution, driven by the invention of the microchip and the dawn of the knowledge economy.
Right.
If the steam engine amplified physical power, the microchip amplified computational power. And it triggered a massive demographic shift in the workforce that we are still living through today.
Look at the numbers from Crawford. In 1870, almost 50% of the U.S. population still worked on a farm.
Wow.
Today, it's roughly 1%. The vast majority of the workforce transitioned into offices, retail, management, and service jobs.
Work became drastically less physically dangerous. I mean, you were very unlikely to lose an arm to a malfunctioning spreadsheet.
True.
But it became significantly more mentally and psychologically demanding. We traded the acute physical exhaustion of the factory floor for the chronic cognitive exhaustion of the cubicle.
Right.
We moved into roles requiring high levels of continuous education, complex problem solving, and constant interpersonal communication.
And for a few decades, we settled into a new rhythm. You get an education, you get an office job, you get a stable salary, you get health benefits, and you eventually retire.
Yeah, that was the deal.
But recently, we've seen the pendulum swing again. We are seeing a massive shift away from the stability of the traditional corporate employee and a move back toward a kind of hyper-modern digital craft work. I'm talking about the rise of the gig economy.
The gig economy platforms like Uber, Lyft, Instacart, TaskRabbit, it offers a sociological trade-off that we haven't seen on this scale since before the Industrial Revolution.
Because if you drive for Uber, you have total granular flexibility. You set your own hours. You work exactly when you want. You log off when you want. You have reclaimed the daily autonomy that the factory worker lost 200 years ago.
But you lose the reliability and the safety net.
Yeah.
You don't have a guaranteed salary. You don't have employer-provided health benefits. You aren't covered by workers' compensation in the same way. You are outside the traditional safety nets that the labor movement fought so hard to build over the 20th century.
And our legal system is currently failing to figure out how to categorize this new type of worker. Why do our laws fail Uber drivers?
Well, because our regulatory frameworks were built for the 20th century factory and office models, and they are completely unequipped to grapple with 21st century algorithmic management.
Okay.
Crawford brings up the California AB5 law in his Q&A session. This was a deeply controversial law that attempted to force gig companies to reclassify their independent contractors as traditional W-2 employees.
It was an attempt to jam the new digital reality back into the old industrial box.
Exactly. And the workers themselves are often torn. Many want the flexibility of the old craft days, but society is terrified of losing the hard-won safety nets of the employee era. The AB5 law caused massive unintended disruptions. It didn't just affect Uber drivers. Freelance writers, musicians, and independent creatives suddenly found their traditional ways of working criminalized because they didn't fit the rigid 1930s era definitions of employment.
The anxiety over this new precariousness has led to heavily debated political concepts like universal basic income or UBI. And again, remaining neutral here, UBI is essentially a proposed structural adaptation to a world where traditional, stable employment might become permanently scarce. It's the idea of giving everyone a baseline income, regardless of work, to artificially provide that lost stability.
Crawford notes in his lecture that debates over UBI often bypass the deep psychological aspects of work, focusing purely on the mathematics of welfare distribution.
Yeah.
But the fact that UBI is even being seriously discussed by major economists and politicians shows how deeply the foundations of the knowledge economy are shaking.
And the incredible thing is those foundations were shaking before the robots learned how to paint and write poetry.
Oh, yeah.
Which brings us to the bleeding edge of our timeline. The GenAI revolution and the unprecedented reorganization of creative and cognitive labor.
We are standing right at the precipice of the fifth social revolution.
Feels like it.
For the last few decades, we assumed that while algorithms could optimize global supply chains or navigate cars through traffic, they couldn't touch the truly human domain.
The hard case for automation, as the Woronkovitz study calls it. Creativity.
Right.
We deeply believe that writing a poem, designing a brand logo, composing a piece of music, these relied on an ineffable human judgment, emotional expression, and imagination. We thought they were safe from the machines.
But generative AI has completely destabilized that core assumption. Tools like ChatGPT for text, Midjourney for images, Sora for video, they've violently blurred the line between a tool that simply assists a human and a tool that can fundamentally substitute for one.
Yeah.
AI can now produce plausible, highly complex, high-quality creative outputs in a matter of seconds.
So how are working professionals actually responding to this? Because the mainstream narrative is usually just pure panic.
Yeah, totally.
It's this idea that the machines are completely taking over the artist's canvas and the writer's keyboard. But the brand new data we have tells a much more nuanced story. The Woronkovitz et al. Study from 2026 utilizes the SNAP Pulse survey.
Yes.
They surveyed over 2,000 arts and design alumni. These are working creatives in the trenches. What did they find?
They found a story of highly uneven incorporation and profound structural ambivalence. According to the survey, nearly 40%, 38.7% to be exact, are already using AI both at home and at work.
Okay, so the technology is deeply embedded.
It is. But the critical insight is how they're using it.
They aren't just handing over the steering wheel.
Rarely. The survey breaks down the exact modes of human-machine collaboration. Only 13% of users see AI as a true partner, where creative responsibility is equally shared.
Wow, just 13%.
Yeah. Nearly 50% use it in a strictly assistive role, meaning the AI supports minor subtasks but doesn't lead the creative direction. And 37% say their work is entirely human-led, where they dictate the entire process with little to no meaningful role for the AI.
Let's group the stats on what specific tasks they're actually outsourcing to the machines, because this tells us exactly what human beings still value about their own labor. Essentially, half the workforce is using AI as a high-tech intern to do the boring stuff. 55% use it for drafting text, almost 47% for editing, and 45% for brainstorming ideas.
Right.
But only a tiny fraction, about 25%, are letting the AI generate the final client-facing images.
What this data tells us is that human beings are fiercely guarding the core of the creative act. They are using AI to clear away the administrative brush.
Yeah.
In fact, the primary motivation cited for using AI by a massive 61.6% of respondents is simply to free up time for higher value, deeply human work.
Like AI is the roadie right now, not the lead singer.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Yeah, it's hauling the heavy amps, it's tuning the guitars, it's taping down the set list and checking the mics. It is doing all the necessary invisible heavy lifting so that the human can just walk out onto the stage, grab the mic, and perform the art.
The sociologists in our source delineate this beautifully as front stage versus backstage work.
Okay.
Broad, text-based tools like ChatGPT are heavily utilized for backstage administrative tasks. Writing mundane emails, summarizing meeting notes, drafting initial grant proposals.
The stuff nobody wants to do anyway.
Exactly. This is the friction that exhausts creatives but isn't the core of their identity.
But then you have specific, highly capable tools like Adobe Firefly, which the data shows is heavily concentrated among graphic designers.
Right.
That's a tool operating much closer to the front stage. It is directly generating the visual elements of the final product.
And that distinction, how close the AI gets to the front stage to the expressive client-facing surface of the work, is what triggers the massive existential crisis we are seeing in the creative workforce today.
Yeah.
Because while AI makes us undeniably faster, more efficient, and more productive, it forces us to ask a terrifying, deeply philosophical question. What happens to the soul of the work?
Which brings us to the modern worker's ultimate dilemma: authenticity and inequality. The fear out there isn't just about losing a paycheck to a cheaper algorithm. It's about losing your fundamental identity as a creator.
The Woronkovich study unpacks this crisis by identifying two distinct, powerful fears creatives hold regarding AI.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first is judgment. This is the external fear that clients, employers, or audiences will view the work negatively or reject it outright simply because an AI was involved in its creation.
Makes sense.
The second fear is dilution. This is a much more internal, personal anxiety. The worker feeling that by relying heavily on AI, their unique personal style, their individual creative voice, and the fundamental authenticity of their output is slowly eroding away.
It's the psychological difference between will people think I'm a fraud and am I actually becoming a fraud?
Exactly. And the data reveals a truly fascinating occupational split here. The fear of dilution, that internal erosion of style, is broadly shared across almost all creative fields. Everyone is worried about losing their human touch.
Right.
But the fear of judgment is highly variable depending on exactly what your job is.
I found this part of the study incredible. Animators, writers, and interior designers report significantly higher anxiety about being judged for using AI. But graphic designers and web designers are much less worried about it. Why the massive difference? I mean, they are all working creatives.
It comes down to a brilliant sociological concept the study introduces called authenticity regimes.
Authenticity regimes.
Yes, authenticity, the study argues, is not an inherent physical property of a piece of work. You cannot put a digital painting or a translated poem under a microscope and measure its authenticity.
Right.
Authenticity is a social agreement. It is a set of invisible rules negotiated between the creator, the audience, and the market.
How do these regimes play out in the real world?
It depends entirely on what the specific industry's metrics value. If an industry values pure functional output like, does the website load quickly? Does the graphic clearly communicate the sale price? Does the interface make sense? Then the use of AI is easily accepted by the authenticity regime.
Because the audience doesn't care how the web designer coded the button as long as the button works perfectly.
Exactly. The regime allows for heavy machine assistance without penalty.
But if the industry values the human touch,
Then the presence of AI is a severe breach of contract.
wow.
Take the example of professional literary translators detailed in the sources by Giustini et al.
Yeah, that was a great example.
Machine translation today is incredibly fast and mostly grammatically accurate. But professional translators actively, fiercely resist total automation. Why? Because literary translation requires deep cultural nuance, emotional resonance, and interpretive human judgment.
Right.
To maintain their value and their occupational identity, these translators have to actively sneak the human back in.
They use the AI for the rough backstage draft, but they aggressively guard the final polishing, the emotional inflection, as their exclusive human domain.
Exactly. If a poem is translated purely by an AI, the audience rejects it. They don't reject it because the grammar is wrong. They reject it because the authenticity regime of poetry demands a human soul behind the words.
They are buying the human connection, not just the accurate transfer of information.
Right.
So if the AI stays backstage, hauling the amps, the regime is fine. But if it steps into the spotlight and tries to sing, it violates the social agreement.
That's a perfect summary.
That is deeply profound. But I have to push back on how we usually frame this entire AI conversation.
Okay.
We always talk about AI as this massive tidal wave that is going to wash away the workers equally. But isn't there a massive structural inequality in who even gets to use the AI right now? It feels like we are assuming everyone has equal access to the surfboard.
That is a critical point, and it is the second major finding of the Pulse survey data. We usually view technological inequality as a downstream effect, like who loses their job to the robot.
Yeah.
But the sociologists point out that the new digital inequality is actually upstream. It is entirely about who has the capacity, the resources, and the safety to adopt and experiment with the technology in the first place.
And the data on who is actually adopting it is surprising. You would assume it would just be the people with the most formal education, the ones with the fanciest degrees.
You would think so. But the regression models in the study show that formal education, having a master's or a PhD, is not the primary driver of who uses AI at work. The strongest patterns are strictly socioeconomic.
Wow.
AI adoption is dictated by income and fundamentally by time.
Time. That makes so much sense when you think about the mechanics of learning a new tool.
When the researchers asked non-users what would make them more likely to use AI at work, the number one answer from 65.6% of respondents was more time to experiment and learn.
And the second highest.
At 55%, it was assurance that data privacy is protected.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of how the modern workplace operates, the implications are staggering.
Yeah.
Think about it. If you are a high-income, salaried knowledge worker with a stable job, you have the luxury of spending 3 hours on a Tuesday afternoon messing around with ChatGPT prompts.
Right, to see if it can write your weekly report faster.
Yeah, and if the AI hallucinates and messes up, you just delete it and write it yourself. You have the discretionary time and the professional safety net to experiment and fail.
And once you figure it out, you become massively more productive, which secures your high-income job even further. You pull ahead.
But if you are a precarious worker like a freelancer in the gig economy juggling 4 different clients, paid strictly by the hour, living paycheck to paycheck,
Yeah.
you cannot afford to waste 3 unbillable hours testing an AI tool that might ruin your project. You don't have the time, you don't have the buffer for error, and you likely don't trust the platform with your client's proprietary data.
The technology that is supposed to democratize creativity and make everyone faster actually acts as an accelerant for existing inequalities.
It's just wild. The secure workers get faster, more efficient, and richer, while the precarious workers, paralyzed by a lack of time and a lack of margin for error, fall further and further behind.
It is the ultimate double-edged sword of the GenAI revolution. It offers incredible workflow efficiencies, but it brutally stratifies the workforce based on who can afford the luxury of adaptation.
Let's take a deep breath here. We have just traveled an immense, exhausting distance.
We really have.
We started with egalitarian hunter-gatherers pulling berries off bushes and valuing mobility over wealth.
Yeah.
We moved to peasants, scratching the earth with plows and inventing the class system.
Yeah.
We watched children inhaling lint in deafening textile mills, and we watched the rise of the unions fighting for the weekend. We analyzed Uber drivers navigating algorithms without safety nets, and finally, we looked at graphic designers negotiating their own authenticity with artificial intelligence.
It is a 3,000-year arc of technological disruption, massive wealth generation, and relentless social reorganization.
So, as we synthesize this entire journey, What does this massive timeline tell us about ourselves?
Hmm.
What is the core takeaway regarding the human relationship to work?
We have to balance the historical scales.
Okay.
If we look back, the physical gains humanity has won through technology and societal negotiation are miraculous. We have largely escaped a world where half the population lived on the brink of starvation, performing backbreaking labor for the equivalent of $10 a day.
Right.
We eradicated widespread child labor in the developed world. We fought for and won safer environments, replacing unguarded spinning blades with liability laws and engineering boards. We slashed the 80-hour work week in half.
That's incredible progress.
Today, as Crawford calculated, up to 80% of our lifetime hours are free from market labor. We are incredibly wealthy in terms of time, safety, and resources compared to our ancestors.
The machines took the drudgery, the acute physical danger, and the sheer exhaustion away from us.
They did. Yet, despite all this incredible material progress, the deep psychological tension remains completely unresolved.
How so?
We are still fighting the exact same core struggle today that the master craftsman fought when he was forced into the 19th century factory. We are fighting for our autonomy. We are fighting for the preservation and recognition of our human expertise.
Yeah.
We are terrified of becoming an ever cheaper commodity in the face of our own incredible inventions.
Which leads me to a final provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about your week. The sources bring up the famous economist John Maynard Keynes. In the early 20th century, looking at the massive exponential productivity gains of the Industrial Revolution, Keynes made a bold prediction. He believed that by our current era, human beings would be so rich and machines would be so unbelievably efficient that we would only need to work about 15 hours a week.
He really thought that.
He thought we would spend the vast majority of our time essentially doing whatever we wanted, pursuing leisure, art, philosophy, connection.
He was a brilliant economist, but he was completely wrong about human nature. We still work 40-hour weeks, and often much more. The core sociological question is, why?
Yeah, why do we keep working so hard when we could technically afford to stop?
The sources offer an incredible perspective on this, rooted in the philosophy of Ayn Rand. The answer might be that work is no longer just a crude mechanism for physical survival.
Right.
For modern humans, productive work provides a central purpose that serves to integrate all the disparate concerns of a person's life.
Without a central purpose, a person is lost in psychological chaos.
Exactly. Work organizes our minds, it gives us tangible goals, it forces us to interact with reality and with each other, it provides a vital scaffolding for our self-esteem and our identity.
So here's the question you have to wonder about.
Yeah.
We are entering an age of rapid, terrifying automation. The AI can write the essay, it can design the logo, it can write the code. It is rapidly encroaching on the very cognitive tasks we thought defined us as a species.
Yeah.
If the day comes when the machines can truly do it all, when they can generate all the wealth, all the food, and all the art we could ever consume, will we finally accept Keynes' 15-hour workweek?
Or will we find that our psychology demands a central purpose to stave off the chaos?
Even if the machines can do it perfectly, maybe we will insist on working anyway just to prove to ourselves and to the universe that we are still here.
It is the ultimate test of the social fabric. We spent 3,000 years building increasingly complex machines to free us from the burden of labor. Now we have to figure out who we are without it.
Tomorrow morning, when you open your laptop or clock into your shift, or even if you're just asking a chatbot to quickly summarize an email, I encourage you to think critically about the 3,000 years of history echoing in that simple action. You are part of an ongoing, endlessly fascinating evolution. Have a truly great rest of your week.